Yeah, I gotta check those comments out.
And here we are for another commentary episode. I'm very excited about this. It seems the timing is probably appropriate. We are going to be covering episode 4 of season 1, which is entitled Going Back and Forth. So, given the conversations that we've been having recently and the experiences that we've had in the California retreat and afterwards, and all of the going back and forth that we've been going through, I think this is going to be a good episode.
Oh yeah, based on the title, certainly excited for this one. So ready to kick it off?
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Dualistic Unity. I am playing the part of Andrew today.
And I am Ray, speaking for the trees, because I came back from a week in the forest and I feel very much like the Lorax right now. Though I'm trying not to give in to opinion in general, I will admit it's difficult to see the reality of how humanity is integrating, or rather not integrating with nature, and the reality of even how much things can change in a 17-year time span, for example, because I went camping very close to the place where I had lived in the forest for 8 months in a shack that I had built myself with my girlfriend at the time. And we went back to where we had built that shack, and the forest that we had been in, it wasn't anywhere close to town. It was a good walk to get to our shack through the bush. It wasn't friendly territory at all, but there's like 1 or 2 logging roads going through there now. The shack itself has been torn down. It looks like somebody had tried to replace it sometime along the way. And it's just amazing. Like in 17 years, all of a sudden that forest, which had once seemed so familiar, seems completely foreign. And you can...
I just want to comment real quick on how, like, fresh out the box we both look like, and good the timing with posting, both of us kind of posting some older videos as well, and how kind of appropriate like each other for that time period was versus now, and like the shifts in perspectives. But we both, not that we look more weathered, but I think, yeah, both of us relative to now look more baby faced for sure. And like, yeah, just feel just as young a lot of times, if not younger than I am there. But yeah, it's funny to see these older episodes.
I think so too. It's kind of funny because what I see there is somebody who still has a job working for somebody who gives a shit if I shave. It's almost sad that the generation that's coming up now, the people who are your age, for example, which was around my age when I went and did that, don't really have many options to do that experience. There aren't many options to get off the land and away from, or to get off the grid and just get away from everything and kind of survive on your own. There aren't any places to go. This one person actually wrote to me saying, in my country, we're not allowed to go and live off the land. We're not allowed to live off grid because it's all protected forest by the government. And it's like, right, until they need to cut it down, right? Until they want to cut it down. Then it's so much for that protection, kind of like what's happening on Vancouver Island with Fairy Creek right now. It's this old growth forest. It's one of the last old growth forests. And there have been people, hundreds of people out there getting arrested daily over the last several months. Even right now, I encourage people to look it up, Fairy Creek in British Columbia. But they're just cutting down this old growth forest, despite the fact that it is so essential to our ecosystem. It's so essential to the world and the environment as a whole. And it's just in the name of profit and short-sightedness and egotism and control and stability, and the same stuff that continues to run this society as we look at it, right? It's just the cornerstone of how we operate as a species. And there's no awareness in it. It's like habit takes on the appearance of intelligence after a while. And it's not intelligence. It's just us going through the motions, even when that's destructive. And it feels good because it's familiar.
I was going to ask what your thoughts were on that occurrence, but you kind of went into it a little bit. But yeah, with a lot of these things that are happening in the name of profit and just growth and progression, I guess I'm curious if they're are going to be ways, or we get to a point where we take a step back and look at it and think, is this worth it? But I think because we look at everything from this very separated, individualistic lens, it's almost like I'm not sure, unless things really, really, not that they aren't pretty bad already, if they really, really get to a point where it's actually impacting individuals significantly. It's almost like it is, but it's a slow progression. I'm curious if you think there is going to be a point that it gets to, or if you've thought about what that point would be, because I don't know if I see that,
I've been watching the absurdity for almost 20 years. And
I've said it a lot before, but just how much early in the podcast, it was a lot of questions. Like it was kind of a constant sort of questioning. And it's not to say, and I think with things like this, like larger societal things, it was like we're figuring society out instead of not figuring myself out, but just like every every day, every year of the podcast has gotten closer and closer to just like not being about society as much as it is just my own experience. And so yeah, there was a lot of questions early on and just like looking for some sort of answer.
But that's it. I mean, admittedly, this is episode 4, and I believe our 5th or 6th discussion. Maybe we had a few in between, because I think we started Patreon somewhere around here, maybe a little bit after. But that was the whole thing, is that you were coming into the conversation that I had been having for 20 years, and there was a lot of questions because there was a lot of middle ground that we had to cover. That's why it took us we're still covering it, for fuck's sakes. So, I mean, it's always going to start in that way, which is why we encourage people, question everything, ask lots of questions. Usually what happens though is we want to settle on answers, and we don't even realize that, question everything can be an answer if we lean on it too hard, so at the end of the day, it's like question everything, even, your need to question anything. You could just be silent. You could just be here.
And I remember back after 9/11 and the massive response in terms of being anti-Islamic as a result of 9/11, even people who had nothing to do with it, the government response, the government, the media hype, everything about it. And it was just this absurd circus that, again, justifiably to some degree, because there was something there that was impactful and it changed the whole world. There was just a huge amount of fear, but then the system just came out in force, and they're like, oh, let no tragedy go, unused. And so they did, and they solidified their power, and they did what they always do, and it became another way to make money and profit. And then I remember Rudy Giuliani was he had a fundraiser where the donation to get to the fundraiser was $911. It's like, really? Like, you don't think that's a little bit, just not respectful? Let's say that. Let's just say you're marketing a tragedy again. And that's kind of the point. But I've been watching the media ever since then, and
I can remember you mentioning that, and at first my initial thought was like, oh, yeah, I kind of see why that's like off-putting, but at the same time, it's like, they got to pick some number. And now it's like, oh man, oh, that's such like a sort of marketing. It's almost like too good. It's like this is an atrocious thing that happened, and to like even just have that degree of like we're gonna do this because of this. It's like yeah, maybe not, maybe not.
Oh man, could you imagine? It's like, come in for our Hiroshima holidays. Our prices are explosive. Like it's fucking brutal. Like it's just, and that's the whole point. But it's all in the name of profit. And there's a degree of insensitivity simply because you're single-minded. You're doing that thing that defines you. That thing that puts you above everybody else in this mentality that makes sense at the time. You're like, I'm on my own. I got to be better. It's just a sad way to live, but it's the kind of absurdity that comes from it.
the government. And yeah, I think about it constantly. What is going to be the breaking point? What's going to be the point where we turn around? And at one point, I was absolutely sure it was going to be, the apocalypse, Armageddon. Like it was just going to be World War III or something weird happening, a comet from the sky. And that's all possible. It's not like Earth doesn't get pummeled from time to time. I think it's every 400,000 years we get a super volcano, and then there's extinction level events that happen fairly regularly. So that's not out of the question. But over time, I've kind of realized that I gravitated towards that end result because it's almost easier than the alternative, which is thinking that we can change, which is thinking that one person can, in fact, in their own life, by their own will, create enough ripples that the rest of the whole feels it, right? And that's what every religion circles around, is some crazy asshole who's thinking the same thing. Like, if I'm just talking about this all the time, maybe we can do something. And that's it. And I think more and more, the older I get, I think that is more a possibility. And this conversation kind of solidifies that, right? Conversations I have like this with more and more people, it's inspiring to me. Every day I get messages now on TikTok or Instagram from people who are thinking about this stuff. And 20 years ago, I was the odd man out. I was the crazy person in the room. And now I'm not. I'm the reasonable voice in the room going, no, we're not disconnected. This is all based on a misunderstanding. And at one point it's like, shut that guy up. Now it's actually, this does kind of suck. And I'm noticing it more and more. Maybe I should listen to what that guy's saying. Right. And that's all I'm ever saying. I'm saying the same stuff. That's what I love posting about my videos from 2005 is I'm pretty consistent. I've just gotten a little bit more clear. Right. I've just gotten a little bit more out of the way. I'm not like, I'm going to save the world. There's no me. This is just ripples that are happening. I'm just part of something that's happening. And that's what I mean by, I think about this stuff all the time. Like, it's very hard to not look at the changes individually and then look at the changes collectively, because as above, so below, right?
And I find this so very interesting, just how much 2.5 years has changed my life. Because there is so much less of that active trying to process anything. Not trying to, but even processing. Like, things are just sliding into place. I'm no longer walking around going, oh, and oh my God. Oh, wow, it's a big one. Oh, Jesus. It's very rare that something hits me so hard that I actually stop and go, oh, fuck, anymore. Where at that point, 2.5 years ago, I was still just like, surely all these ripples are doing fucking something. And I was trying to see them. And then as Dualistic Unity started coming into being, I recognized that, why do I need to see them? Did I ever need to see them? For a long time, I actually went through life going, maybe I'll never see them. Maybe I'll die and I'll never know. It's enough that I'm at least experiencing the ripples myself. So this has been all just a huge, huge journey for me. It's really getting quite interesting too.
Yeah, and it's interesting how both, because like at this point, I feel like now it's not necessarily it is having let go of things, but at this point it was didn't even know what I was holding on to so much, whereas now it's like a lot more aware. And yeah, back then, I mean, I was hardly even smoking any weed at all back then. It was like mushrooms here and there, but yeah, like a lot of these, pretty much all the initial episodes, like I'm pretty much sober through almost all of them. So that definitely opened up a lot of doors too.
Yeah,
We change the same way collectively as we do individually. We're just a bigger mind.
Yeah, and I think I've at least in my short time here noticed that I think I'm seeing it in different areas. Like, there's so many different pockets of society and things that we do and ways that we interact. And I think it probably started more so with your generation, like you and you're kind of in between me and my parents' generation. My parents are getting close to 60 now, and I think since them we've started to have more people just questioning things. And I guess it probably started with the 60s and sort of that
or the roaring 20s. I mean, there
yeah.
have been regular events in history where sizable pockets of humanity have went, hold on, we're not thinking the right way. Look at the Civil War in the United States, right? And basically over slavery, that's a sizable pocket of the population that suddenly went, no, okay, we have to do something about this, right? So it's like we regularly have these little bubbles of awareness that surface in our collective mentality, right? And then they change everything. But each of us individually are a part of those bubbles. That's kind of the thing that gets me. It's like, are we part of the bubble, or do we cause the bubble? Like, how much of a role do we have in this? And I find that the more we're willing to take it on ourselves, just, it's like I've said to my daughter, if there's nobody else in the world who's trying to get past their own egotistical crap, at least there's you, right? And that should be enough. If it's just me, so be it. And that mentality just seems to have more of an impact than, you know, we're going to get together as a soul family or a spiritual army, and we're going to change the system. And it's like, well, what does that mean? What do we mean by we're going to get together? Now, we're coming together out of a need to fix things. We're coming together out of a mentality of control, and we're doing so in a state where we're not thinking clearly and responsibly as the awareness of the universe, which is why we want to get together, is why we want to, you know, band together to create kind of an army or a spiritual, you know, force. And so we missed the point. It's kind of like 2008. I don't know, remember, if you remember Occupy Wall Street?
Yeah, vaguely. I mean, I was 13.
They had a great point, right? Like, what I liked about Occupy was that, and how it started was that everybody just acknowledged there is something drastically wrong with the system. There's something wrong. And so everybody got together and went, this has to be addressed. We need to address this. We're going to occupy, you know, the source of corruption and greed as we see it, and we're going to make a big noise. And I found the system's response to that brilliant, which was, well, what specifically is your problem? And so they kind of divided the Occupy group based on that, because everybody has their own individual gripe based on their own individual perspective of themselves. And so they started arguing amongst themselves. And then the Occupy group actually ended up dividing down the middle between the richer people and the poorer people, because of course they're still identifying, they're still being egotistical. So they're standing up saying there's a problem with the system. The system's going, oh, well, what's the problem? Everybody's arguing about what the individual problems are. And that was the problem. It was the mentality that was creating that argument. It was the mentality that was creating that competition, that comparison, that continued division between each of us. Whereas the whole point was the original argument, which was, there's a problem. There's multiple problems that stem from it, and we need to stop what we're doing in order to fix it. And we never did. We never stopped. We just found a way to keep rolling with it. And so now, does it come down to a calamity?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, it's interesting how it's the mentality, but it's that mentality is like trying to feel right. So it's like recognizing a problem, and then in response, feeling like you're doing the right thing in response to that problem can't really be a part of it. Like, that sense of doing the right thing is kind of the thing that's, you know, that good feeling that that I've certainly looked for, like, you're living life the right way, doing the right thing. And so if that's, you know, responding to problems with the right thing, the correct answer, instead of just, you know, not needing to feel that, you know, good feeling because you feel like you're doing the right thing. Yeah, they definitely feel like they go hand in hand, or that it's necessary.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch. Absolutely. I'm gonna continue this because I'm curious as to where I was going with it. I haven't watched these since we recorded it.
That makes us do it, or do conversations like this turn the tide, or is it going to be a combination of the two?
Yeah, I definitely think it could be a combo. And with the Occupy Wall Street example, it almost makes me think that there's someone on the inside who knew what the problem was on the Wall Street side, and they kind of used that against to within, like, sort of break down the Occupy side of it from within. And it makes me wonder, like, does someone actually know what the problem is and they don't care, and they're using it to their advantage just to have more money or whatever it is, still realizing the egotistical side of it, but then, like, they almost knew it and they could use it. It was, I don't know, that seems kind of interesting. Like,
or is it a knee-jerk response, an automatic
Want to give a quick shout out to our community topics episode on Freemasonry and secret societies, because that's where we got to get into that subject. And I remember specifically going, I'm not going to go that way right now.
Response of the ego, of that mentality, just like, leave no tragedy unsquandered, right? Or no tragedy squandered. It's like, what can I make of this? What can I use this for? And that's just, that is a natural mentality. When we're separate from the universe, we're always trying to figure out how to survive against something that's separate and therefore scary, right? And so we get competitive and controlling, and we start to look at people as disconnected, and we start to kind of close off our empathy, because empathizing with the people that you're stepping on in order to protect yourself makes it more difficult for you to do those things to protect yourself. And so you have to sacrifice your security for empathy, right? And so it's a weird trade. And so again, like, how much of what is happening is the result of our overcommitment to a mentality rather than a small group of people who are manipulating the masses?
Yeah, it kind of brings about that idea of problems of the mind can't be solved at the level of the mind. It has to be something greater than, and realizing that, maybe the problem is just the idea that we are separate to begin with, and the how sure we are of it. And that's almost something that people never question. It's like I'm not sure. Even someone who's not sure of many things and questions a lot of things, they could say, I'm not sure of many things, but I'm sure that I am Andrew, or I'm sure that I'm this person. It's like the one thing left out of someone who could question a lot that, like, they're seemingly sure of. And it's like, well, have you ever questioned that? And maybe that is sort of will open the door to change and true progress back, maybe seemingly backwards progress, but
Totally.
forward.
No, a lot of factors
certainly.
change that response, right? Like how comfortable they are, how old they are, how long they've been invested in this game, how much of the people around them are invested in the same game. I find that that's another thing that really sucks, because it's a crab bucket, right? Right? Every crab's trying to pull the other crabs down as they're trying to escape, and so nobody gets out of the bucket because all the other crabs are pulling them back in, and that's very much the mentality. It's like, you try, in toxic family relationships especially, you try to get past your mentality of yourself, your idea of yourself. You start to get past your limitations, and all of a sudden everybody comes out of the woodwork telling you, no, you are that thing. No, you are the thing we think you are. That's it. You're deluding yourself into thinking you can change, or you can, and they try to pull you back into identifying the way that makes them comfortable, right? And so again, it's a knee-jerk response, and you can get angry at them about it, but they don't see that they're doing it, right? They don't understand that's what they're doing, because it's just the way they see the world. To them, it makes perfect sense, right? That's it. And so it's almost like you're talking a different language, or you're speaking a different language when you go to somebody in that mentality, and you're like, let's just question ourselves. And they're like, why would I do that? It took me forever to build this idea of myself. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? That's what everybody around me is doing. Everybody's telling me I'm this thing. Why would I do that? And you're just like, when you suffer enough, it'll make sense. And that's the point. And then I think that goes back to your original question about what's going to be the tipping point. I find more people are questioning because our reality, our society, is creating so much consequence under the surface. It's so interesting. We have so many conveniences. We have digital devices that connect us in seconds, and yet we're so disconnected from one another, right? We have so much information and so little self-knowledge. And so it's such an interesting duality again, right?
Yeah.
And I just want to stop and have a brief moment of celebration for everything that Dualistic Unity has become since this conversation, because I never thought that it would be this, that we'd have such a thriving community, that we'd have such a vibrant conversation, that so many of the people in our community are out there having conversations, pushing the boundaries, questioning themselves, daring to piss people off, just because, what kind of friend is that person anyway, if they're going to get pissed off? Like, it's just, there's so much in terms of like faith and strength and growth. And it's just incredible to see, and to see it in only 2.5 years, to host 10 retreats and meet so many people who are doing this. It's just, it's surreal. It's a dream come true in so many ways. And I just wanted to stop and give a brief moment of recognition to everyone. Hello, listener. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're still kicking it. It's still going, man. And yeah, full steam ahead.
It seems like with a lot of things in our society now, it's like we've gotten to a point that we're, we both live in first world countries, and it seems to me like there's been sort of two paths or two ways you can take it. And one side is that you can find all of the problems and sort of like manifest problems into your own life that and complain about certain things, and we call them like first world problems. And if you really are able to take a step back, you realize how silly it is to complain about if you're at a restaurant and you order water with no ice and they bring water with ice or something, something crazy like that, where someone's literally serving you and you have the amount of money, enough money to pay for it. Or I think there's the other side, which we're kind of doing now with this conversation, is questioning and almost purposefully becoming less comfortable and realizing that there is more things to question, instead of just on that fork, instead of just kind of settling there and just being like, well, I don't have to take either of these, I can just hang out in the fork in the road. Which, and again, there is no better or worse options, and there's a lot of environmental factors, I think, that play into the route that people choose that often gets forgotten when it comes to manifesting and whatnot. But I've seen definitely both sides to it, and I think there's ways to veer off of that form or the first path I mentioned. But yeah, I think it's all a part of the process for everyone collectively, and eventually, I don't know, things will keep happening, I guess.
There's so much effort that goes into our collective egotistical mentality. I mean, there's so much control, and I used to call it spinning plates, right? The more you're trying to juggle your idea of yourself, the more plates you have spinning, the more you have to worry about what that person thinks and that person thinks and what you've done over there, and did you do enough to do this? And you're always trying to live up to this invisible bar that you set for yourself, but it becomes overwhelming. And after a while you start to stress out, and that stress takes its toll on your body, and that toll on your body takes its toll on your motivation, and everything else starts to suffer. Your responses to people change, you start getting more testy, more resentful, you start to think of yourself, your serotonin drops, and it becomes this downward spiral into depression and apathy. And it was all just because of the original mentality that we were committed to. Whereas, if we just went, I don't need to spin all these plates, this is stupid, I can just let the plates fall because I can just put up more plates. None of them are really me. It's not really that important. I can choose which plates I want to spin because I want to spin them, not because I think I need to spin them. And all of a sudden, all that weight falls off, and we find ourselves more clear, and we find ourselves more able to see things in a different light. We see more possibilities. Everything opens up. And that's the one-step process that we talked about last time, right? Is that we keep trying to figure out, well, how do we change the world? It's like, well, we got to get our head out of our ass before we can even answer that question. We can't have the conversation, how do we change the world, until we address the mentality that's not able to see the solution.
Certainly. Yeah, I think we build up all of these, and we've talked about this before, these ideas of what we have to do and what we should do and who we are, and they're all made up and they're not necessary. And I think it's something that I've sort of been, I don't want to say struggling with, but sort of toying with, is this new idea that I've always been driven in different ways for different reasons. And I've gotten to a point that's been sort of up and down, realizing that I don't need to do as many things or accomplish as many things. And so part of me feels kind of bad, like I should be wanting to do things or like striving towards things. And I still have things I enjoy and do, but because I know that I don't have to, it's been kind of this back and forth where I think today was a day or yesterday I wasn't like, productive, didn't do all. I just want to say that back and forth is still very much, very much at play all the time. It's each and every time it's like shifting as there have been more plates that have fallen. It's like that the reason what's done, not even just day to day, but like month to month, year to year, has shifted, I think, each and every time. So it's funny to see this just like and kind of like feeling the same thing day to day, but how much the day to day shifts impact like the longer term, and seeing it like in real time like this is funny. All the things that I would have wanted to do, or I don't even know exactly how to explain it. And then today I did more things, but it's just kind of like this back and forth of always being very rigid and structured with things and things that I wanted to do. And I still will keep a to-do list of just to remember if there are certain things that I want to do, because I'll forget if I don't write it down. But I don't know, I find myself sort of going back and forth and almost wanting, like sort of craving that structure to have back into my life, in my, very set morning routine. Whereas some days I don't want that, but then some days maybe it's my ego coming back and being like, you need to be doing this, or you need this. And I know that I don't. So I just laugh every time, and old videos do it too, but I'll throw around like my ego creeping back in, taking my ego very seriously, or like now that I have let go of my identification as Andrew, and I just appreciate the conviction that I had back then, and how much like that statements like that have become more and more hesitant, or just not even used. Like I don't even remember the last time I said ego. But yeah. So it's been sort of a back and forth. I don't know if you experience
for
similar.
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And well, I mean, I was more or less raised an army brat, so discipline was a big part of it. I went to an academy for high school where we had uniforms and inspections in the morning, and we had to do all that. And so discipline was a big part of that. And of course, there's work. There's all the stuff that goes with work or learning if you're in school or any of that. So there is a benefit to keeping track of all that, especially if you have a lot to juggle. But then there's the stuff that we add on top of it, like the psychological pressure. Like, if I don't do that, I'm a failure, right? If I don't do that, oh my God, the whole world's going to fall apart. And so we take the task list and we start to actually like project our assumptions onto it. We start to project other things onto that task list that don't necessarily have to be there. So like with everything, it's a balance, right? Like some days I wake up, I'm like, okay, I'm up, I'm going to do my push-ups, I'm going to make myself a coffee and some breakfast, I'm going to get to work, I'm going to do all that. And then other mornings I wake up and I'm going to go take a walk for 15 minutes and then come back and just get straight to work. And it's whatever I feel like at that day. But knowing that I can switch without it meaning anything about me, knowing that I can be disciplined one day and then the next day go meh, right? That's the freedom, right? It's not like I don't have to beat myself up if I'm not doing one or the other. It's like, oh, I was disciplined today, therefore I'm not flowing with the universe. Shit, I'm going to judge myself, all right? Or the opposite. And it's like, no, either way, you're flowing with the universe. Like that's the thing. Like we look at humanity, look at society, and we're like, oh, this is not the natural world. Well, of course it is to some degree. This is an expression of nature. This is an expression of us, nature, going down a different path, right? It's all the natural world. Now, does that mean that we're always going to be so one side dominant? No, we're going to find that equilibrium, as above, so below. Just like with your schedule, is it discipline or flow? It's kind of both, and it's finding that balance. But our society is very much focused on the discipline, right? On the hard square edges, as opposed to the squiggly lines, as Alan Watts used to refer to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think sometimes you would say the spikes versus the squiggles, or certainly. And I've always been much more on the spiky side and much more just like quantitative in my thinking and analysis of things, always more, better at the math subjects and whatnot. But it's been interesting. And I think it's like an adjustment that I have to go through. almost, not have to, but I am going through it. So it is what it is, more or less. But I've been through things like this before, and I always come out the other side finding more balance. And I've been, because I'm kind of a person of extremes for the most part. Like when I'm in on something, like I'm in on it, I'm passionate about it for sure. And then sometimes like I'll find something else that'll kind of grab my attention, and I'll be able to take what I learned from that and move on and continue. And so I think with this, I've spent 26 years being extremely disciplined and rigid. And, I've I went to the college I wanted to go to, played the sports I wanted to play, because of that, more or less. So there's definitely been, I've derived benefit from it, I guess. And now I sort of have this realization that I don't need to, and I may find some other types of benefits from not doing that all the time. So sort of cut some of that out, and I'll probably end up taking some from both. And I think maybe I've pushed it too far to where maybe I can add a little bit more structure in, and eventually it'll find its way. But I think a key, like you mentioned, is just not judging yourself along the way. And I think just literally as we're talking right now, as I'm speaking, I'm realizing that it's probably, I went to a side that I have never been to, and eventually it'll, course correct, and I'll come out and I'm different and changed, and as you always are. But yeah, I think it's just all part of that sort of process of learning and changing and growing.
Oh, but hold on. We have to, analyze and categorize how you're changing, and we need to set up structures and institutions to, discuss how you're changing and exactly what's happening and all that. And it's like, okay, or I could just take a walk, right? And I'll feel better eventually. And that's it. But we get really caught up in the personalization of what we're going through. And I found that was one of my biggest problems when I was, going through my mental health issues, was that I kept getting told, oh, you have this disorder, and oh, you have this disorder, and this is what's happening. It's like, oh, that's me now, and that's me now. And now everything I saw was through the lens of the disorder that I thought I understood, which was really just a categorization of other people with similar behaviors, and then a bunch of assumptions on top of that. And so it was eventually going, right. I'm just tangled up in a bunch of perceptions and habitual responses. I have to unweave that. I have to just look at where I'm responding out of habit. I'm responding out of assuming that this instance, just because it's similar to a previous instance, deserves the same response, right? And so it's just being honest with myself over and over and over again. And that's really it. That's a big part of the one-step process we talked about last time, is brutal self-honesty. You have to be brutally self-honest. Like, one of my hardest lessons was realizing that I was manipulative, right? Realizing that I was manipulative because I was needy, and because I lacked in myself, and I was selfish and self-involved. And of course I was. That's where I thought value came from, right? And so I had to swallow that pill. And that's what helped me get over that, was admitting that I could be that person, admitting that I could be a liar, admitting that I could be manipulative, or that I could be dishonest. Because we avoid that because it doesn't sit well to admit that we could lie, right? But it's true. Every child can lie. Every person can lie. Anybody who tells you, oh, I couldn't lie, is full of shit. They're lying to you right then and there, right? And that's the whole point. It's always in us. All of it is. And as soon as we are able to accept that without judging it, as soon as we're able to see where it comes from, then we're able to avoid it better, or rather, we're able to learn from it without falling into it.
Yeah. Where do you find the Yeah, and that, because like if it's not, you can't admit that, it's going to be a blind spot for sure. But as soon as it's like, yeah, that's on the table, yeah, I can do that and be that. It's like at least there's the opportunity to see it, because cognitive dissonance is a bitch. And if you don't think that that's on the table, you won't see that shit. But it's on the table for everyone, because like we're doing it in ways you don't even even realize. And like at that point too, because I feel sometimes I'll look back and feel like, oh, I felt like I was almost more able to be, I don't know, like follow things a little bit more or more attentive or whatever. But like most of what I say is like things I've kind of said or thought. Whereas I feel like now it's a lot more like I have no idea what's gonna come out of my mouth most of the time. And here it's like pretty much everything I've said to this point, I remember having said it before. It was just like very much knowing myself and having more of that sense of certainty. So there was almost a comfort in that, but with trade-offs, because like back then I was still very much like measuring everything, tracking calories, weighing myself every day, like all these things that we're kind of talking about right now. There's still lots of ways that I'm doing it. And to that last point you made about self honesty, like it's just been more and more and more self honesty because I was able to talk about certain things without looking at like, oh, I'm doing that in a fuckload of ways. But it was like, because it was a conversation and it wasn't about me because I'm not Andrew and all that. It's a very easy way to separate the conversation. Whereas, like, every season, every year, it's just gotten closer and closer to being like, oh no, this isn't separate from me at all. This is very much talking about myself to myself over and over and over again. And then it wasn't so much, or it didn't feel, it was to the degree that I could. And it's all been process. Yeah. Importance of figuring things out for yourself. Like we talk a lot about this idea of, there is no should. You don't need anyone outside of yourself. You don't need a guru. You don't necessarily need a teacher. Do you think there is some balance necessary in that, in getting to a point maybe where you can even realize that? Because I know we've talked in the past about like AA, and there's levels to all of this, and how the end of AA is realizing that there is a higher power, and then but maybe that's not exactly like 100% optimal, but it's still getting the person from one spot to another. So when it comes to helpful people outside of yourself, or their ability to express something about you that you are not at the moment capable of even seeing, because I think sometimes people struggle with that, as you don't know what you don't know, and oftentimes that is about ourselves. Like some would argue that we can't even know ourselves. How can one know oneself? Like you can't cut a pair of scissors with the same pair of scissors.
Biting your own teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But when it comes to that, like the balance between using your own intuition, what's best, and feeling like you need someone outside of yourself, or utilizing people outside of yourself, or tools outside of yourself.
Even that's part of our intuition.
So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Right now?
Indeed.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, oh man, this has shifted quite a bit toward like far and away from looking to anyone else. And so like again, nothing wrong necessarily, but yeah, every time you look to someone else, it's like there's some validation, some sense of control. So yeah, I mean at this point, I would say it's like, yeah, like not something you necessarily have to do at all.
I mean, to some degree, right? I think the danger is always just attachment. And even that, when you find yourself attached, don't attach to your judgment of your attachment, right? Like it's just recognize that you attached, and kind of, see that for what it is. And there's that brutal self-honesty again. It's like, right, I'm attaching, I'm trying to feel secure, I'm trying to, pass the buck off to somebody else who's going to walk the path for me, whatever that might be. But yeah, everything goes in stages. I was talking about self-love and acceptance in a video recently, And somebody said, well, if I'm a serial killer, so all I have to do is love myself, and I found enlightenment. And it's like, well, as a serial killer, do you think it would be that easy to do that? Do you think that you could just love yourself, given the history and the road that brought you to there, and all of the things you've done since then? Like, that would require so much brutal self-honesty and so much internal struggle that it would happen over decades, possibly forever, until that person died. They may never get to a point where they're able to actually self-love as a result of that process of brutal self-honesty. But that process would go down many different twists and turns. They would find themselves gravitating towards certain teachers, and then gravitating away from them and towards other disciplines like psychology or philosophy. And this is how our process goes. So as much as we can say it's a one-step process, it's a one-step process that plays out over what we view as time, right? And so all of a sudden, yeah, we do get drawn by our intuition towards, say, Krishnamurti. And then our intuition goes, okay, but you're like, every time you're thinking about things, you're like, I gotta go read Krishnamurti. You're getting a little attached, right? And if we're honest about it, we go, right, okay, and we'll put that down, and we'll deal with the uncertainty that goes with having to rely on our own insight again, and we'll weather that for as long as we can, and we'll find our sea legs again. We'll find that balance. Then we'll go off in another direction entirely, and we'll lose ourselves again and attach one more time, and then we'll learn from that, hopefully, if as long as we're self-honest, and we'll pull ourselves back towards center. And so, as with everything, it's just the process of refinement, right? Like right now, I'm in a state where I don't necessarily want to go and read spiritual books. I don't want to go out and listen to spiritual teachers on life and universe and all of that, because I'm learning more from just the day to day, like just from conversations like this, or walking down the street and seeing something that's happening with the neighbors, or anything like that. Like, I'm learning more just from my moment to moment experiences, because that's the state of mind I'm in. Now, that doesn't mean that at some point I'm not going to go suddenly, careening off into the philosophical again, or just going towards, something that's more participatory, as in, trying to implement small ripples of change in the world around me. But it goes one way or another, because we're always learning from the context. And the danger, I think, is that we tend to think, oh, well, one avenue or another has to be my purpose. And it's like, no, you are your purpose. Like, you are all the woven strands of everything you've ever done, right? You are just continuing to weave yourself into a larger strand that creates more of an impact and weaves into other strands. Like, you are your purpose. There isn't any one thing you're supposed to do. You are it.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that. I think last episode with, knowing yourself and who you are and your purpose. And you were talking about all these strands weaving. And I just imagined someone, who say they're 20 years old and they found their purpose. And it's like, I feel like that's just an attachment to one of those strands that are trying to weave together. And once you've, found your purpose, it brings about this sense of security, but then you get locked to that strand. And even though it's trying to weave back with everything else, you've made this decision that this is your purpose, and I've figured it out. I got it nicely packaged up. Yeah. And then you become attached to it and stick to it despite what may want to come along. And because you've attached to that and you believe that to be the truth, you're not open to being able to see the rest of the strands that are coming your way.
Yeah. Because you're comfortable. That's it, right? Like, I think one thing I found to be incredibly sad was Mother Teresa, who is renowned for all the good she did in her life. She had a diary that she wrote during her life, and after she died, it was discovered that she had several moments after deciding to commit to her life of as a missionary, of going around and helping people for God. She actually had many moments of regret afterwards, because although she had one moment where she experienced divinity, or experienced unity, and that's what it basically inspired her to want to help everybody. She saw herself in everybody. She saw us all as one, right? After that, it became a belief, and it just became habit. Instead of being a renewed experience over and over and over again, it became a structure and something she had committed to. And who knows what she might have done had she decided to change path, had she decided to explore different areas rather than just committing to the one role that she did, which I'm not going to say wasn't tremendous in all the good that she did in the world. But who knows what a soul as good as that, a person as good as that, could have accomplished had they not locked themselves into a certain role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Makes you wonder. But yeah, you mentioned before about like serial killers and talking about self-love and whatnot, and made me think of this idea of there not being a right way to be a person or a correct way to be a person, and everything is as it is. There's no objective good or bad. What do you say about serial killers and people like that? Because it's a lot of people's arguments are they, maybe they have like a chemical imbalance and
Mhm.
whatnot.
Mhm.
So
I heard that too when I was going through depression, that there was a chemical imbalance. Nobody ever tested the chemicals. Nobody ever actually did any kind of analysis on the chemicals in my brain. It was just more or less, oh, there's a chemical imbalance. There are cases as well where it's a result of trauma to the brain at a young age. So it's behavioral, and that is physically influenced. Largely, and again, I'm not going to lie, I've got a huge interest in serial killers and all kinds of crimes throughout history, just because, again, what is the mentality that drives us to that? And by and large, it's the environment more often than anything else. It's the lack of connection, or it's the toxicity of the family unit, or it's the toxicity of the mentality that they were taught, the perception of women, the perception of other people, the perception of other races. And so it just contributes over time until there's an outlet that makes no sense to the rest of us, but where they are in their mind, it makes perfect sense. And I think we tend to downplay that our consciousness, if we were to look at our consciousness as a geographic world, it's freaking huge. It's huge with infinite rooms. And in each of those rooms, different things make sense. Different things seem like they seem logical, right? In different states of mind, different things seem logical. And so, yeah, when you're far enough down a particular branch that happens to be dark and toxic, and it takes you down other dark, toxic branches, and that's all you learn the world is, bad shit's going to happen. And so I think that we can't have a discussion about these kind of people on the surface in the same way we can't talk about addiction being about the substance on the surface. We can't simply blame the action. We have to look at the contributing factors, the roots of that action. And the roots of that action are a profoundly sick society at the end of the day, just because we're so divided. Our mentality, once again, discourages empathy. That's going to result in some nasty shit. And it has. I mean, that's the whole point. If you look at our history, we've been completely barbaric, and the cultures that haven't been barbaric, that haven't overcommitted to the mentality of division, of identity and division, are the ones that we wiped out. Right. So we're seeing a resurgence of a mentality that's always there. That's what this conversation is. But it's emerging after another mentality basically tried to stomp it out. Right. So I think that we'll see less crime, and we'll see less murder and less anger and aggression and toxicity as we start identifying and coming to terms with where all of that comes from, what exacerbates it. Because while there's always anger, homicidal anger is an extreme, and that's an extreme that has a lot of contributing factors. No child is born homicidal, again, unless there's certain physical contributions to that. But it's not in us. It's something that we learn. It's a habit or a reaction that we learn over time that eventually becomes, and again, it takes the appearance of intelligence without being intelligent, right? That's why I enjoy, if you ever get a chance, read The Many Minds of Billy Milligan.
I'll write that down.
It's interesting because we're talking about this, and it's there's more to it as well, right? Like there was a case recently in the States where a girl smoked marijuana and then stabbed her boyfriend, and the court ruled that it was marijuana induced psychosis. Now, anybody who's experienced any degree of psychosis, which means thinking your thoughts are reality, you recognize that happens all the time. Right. But if you live in a world where everybody's like, yes, your thoughts are absolutely reality, and then all of a sudden you experience something where you don't have that narrow little box that you live within, where all of a sudden you do start experiencing thoughts outside of what you normally allow yourself to think, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's reality. That's not cannabis-induced psychosis. That's psychosis that's been there the whole time. Right? It has nothing to do with the cannabis and everything to do with the fact that this child, this person has not grown up with any awareness of their mind or what it can do to them. There has not been any kind of developmental conversation with this person. And so instead of looking at what's happening, not responding, not reacting and thinking it through, they just reacted immediately, as they do to every one of their thoughts. I can almost guarantee it. Right? And yet we would be like, no, it's the drug. That's the problem. Because again, we don't want to look at the underlying mentality that is the problem, which is this lack of awareness, this lack of responsibility, this lack of, I guess, attentiveness to how much we have an impact on our experience and how much the brain can create the perception of reality without actually being reality.
Yeah. And like, as we've invested in reality being what I think it is, and like taking that very seriously, which, man, like these episodes for me is the kind of really starting process of like realizing that, oh, that idea of reality and society that I have in my head that's still, there in different ways, like isn't so much the case. Like, yeah, like cannabis really helps to open up that perspective, but then it's like, yeah, not reacting to those, just the uncertainty of like, oh, anything is on the table. Everything is on the table. Like it takes awareness and attention as opposed to like, yeah, just keeping all that stuff at bay or not looking at it. Mm.
That book is fantastic. It's about a person who had multiple personality, and it's based on a real person. And this person basically just slipped in and out of the cracks of society, appearing normal as he drifted from one personality to another, holding down different jobs until eventually he was arrested for sexual assault because one of his personalities tended to want to do that. And so the whole story is about how this person suffering through this incredible mental health issue in terms of having multiple personality disorder had just been forgotten, had just been left to fend for himself in society until finally he broke a rule that was hard enough for people to notice him. But that's happening all the time. And the life that he had that brought him to have to split himself in so many ways is just tragic in the extreme. And yet the mentality is, oh, well, that's a failure of the system. No, it's a failure of us. That's our mentality that the system is reflecting. Right? We have to change individually, but we keep trying to change the system.
So do you think someone like that, Billy Milligan, that could have that many different personalities, do you think that's all learned? Or do you
He
think
actually resolved them. That was the thing. By the end of his life, he's cured. He doesn't have multiple personality anymore. He actually ended up creating his own extra character, whether it was willingly or not, called the teacher. And the teacher's role was to bring all the other characters together to help them integrate with one another to create one whole Billy. So he fixed himself once he had the environment that allowed him to do it.
Wow.
Just crazy.
And I really do want to mention this again. If you have the opportunity to find and read the book, The Many Minds of Billy Milligan, please do. It's a damn good read. It's a fascinating story, and it's based on true events. It's based on a real person.
Yeah. That sounds kind of similar to be related to society to a degree on a mass scale.
Well, look at Rat Wonderland. Have you ever heard of that study? I think that's what it's called.
Maybe, I don't know if I've heard of that name, but
so
possibly.
Basically they took a bunch of rats and they put them in an environment where they gave them a choice between, I think it was water and morphine or something like that. And so the rats basically just kept going back to the morphine over and over and over again to the point where, they were going to die. And so what they did was they changed the environment. They gave the rats like a little wheel to run on. They gave them some like stuff to play in, some tunnels, some things to entertain them. And what they found was that the rats would just go to the water, occasionally going to the drug to kind of increase their enjoyment of the wonderland that they lived in. So once the environment stopped being so sterile and depressing, they got away from the drugs because they weren't trying to escape hell. right? So it's really the environment that we've created for ourselves, and the environment that we've created is very disconnected. It's harsh in the extreme. Like we pay to live on a planet that we spawned from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite intriguing. That study's really interesting, though. Just like the impact of environment. I feel like it's not considered enough almost. I feel like a lot of people, especially when it comes to mental health, just put it on, with the nature versus nurture debate. It's always, it seems like everything's just boxed into the nature side of it, and I think everyone agrees there's a degree of both, but I just hear so often that, the ideas of chemical imbalance and things like that when it comes to mental health that is so common. And so that just kind of allows us to not worry too much about the nurture or the environment.
Well, we can just label people as broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? We don't have to look at anything. But I always, that chemical in the brain argument always gets me, because it's very much, putting the cart before the horse, right? Like we're like, oh, your emotional spectrum is messed up because the chemicals in your brain are imbalanced. It's like, right, but my brain responds to my awareness and my consciousness. So the chemicals it's creating are the result of where I've went in my head, like in my awareness. Like I'm creating chemicals that promote more anxiety because I'm in a mentality that promotes more anxiety. But no, the chemicals are doing it. And that just allows us to pass the buck and not do any self-reflection or introspection or any growth. Just go back to work. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Here's 2 pills. Right. And that's the whole point, is that if we were to, it's like Krishnamurti said, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Right. And that's it, is that we keep trying to adjust to the society around us, but the society around us is toxic. It's based on an old mentality that no longer serves us, and we can feel it in our everyday lives. We feel it when we gripe about having to pay our taxes. We feel it when we gripe about corrupt politicians. We feel it when we gripe about the fact that corporations pay practically nothing and they basically screw up everything for us and then put the responsibility on us. Right? It's like there's 6 companies in the world that create almost all the plastics, but somehow it's on you to recycle. Right. So it comes down to, there's just this massive.
I just remember like how much all these things were like brand new perspectives to me. Like a lot of the perspectives we talk about just about society and whatnot is like, this is the first time I'm hearing about a lot of things, about certain, realities of society and reality. And it kind of reminds me of that movie In Time, where he asks her, like, how do you deal with all these atrocities going on in the world? Don't look. Just don't look. And yeah, this was the beginning. Like a lot of Dualistic Unity, it has been just like seeing more of the world for me, which is which has been a huge component of my own sort of growth and whatnot. But just like even being aware of certain things, because there was a lot that I was not, both external and internal.
It's fascinating to me because you were saying, your experience of Dualistic Unity has been opening yourself up to all these things that you didn't look at previously. That's also my experience of Dualistic Unity before it was ever a podcast. See, it's kind of funny. This is why I'm always saying Dualistic Unity is not really a podcast so much as a result of whatever the fuck this is. Right. And so it's fascinating that I get to, because again, I picked up a lot of this over the years from various different people and sources and different journeys and shit. And so it's cool for me to be able to share some of this stuff with you here. Right. But it's fascinating to me how it really is just the experience of just opening your eyes and being willing to see more of what's around you, which means facing your fear and recognizing why you weren't looking. Well, we'll take a break very shortly and come back for part 2 of this, but I just want to finish whatever the fuck I was just saying here.
Amount of cognitive dissonance that in order for us to change things, we have to change ourselves. That requires us to let go of this mass experiment in comfort and control. And that's what it is. We can take things from this that worked. That's everybody's argument is always, oh, so you just want us to go back to the caveman days, to the Stone Age? It's like, no, obviously. Why would we do that? We have electricity, we have technology, we can use it. I'm saying that maybe it's not the best idea to base everything on money, or maybe it's not the best idea to allow lobbyists and in government, or maybe it's not the best idea to have federally federally run governments that are so large they're disconnected from the people they're supposed to be representing. You know, we can take the things that worked, we can jettison the things that didn't, and continue on. But in order to do that, a lot of people who have been benefiting from this game are going to be super unhappy about it. And that's all we're really seeing. That's what we're seeing in corporate lobbying. That's what we're seeing in politics, is the sway of those who have been benefiting from this toxic game. And all we have to do is just keep going, right, but I don't need to buy your shit, and I don't need to believe in your mentality. I don't need to go out and support this movement or this movement, because it's all bullshit. I need to grow in myself and talk to the person who's next to me like they are me. And that ripple will change everything. But we don't have any control. That's the point, right? Is that we don't. It has to be about the moment we're in.
I think that's an excellent point to stop this episode, because that's it. You're going to go back and forth over this. You're going to see the world, and then you're going to realize your part in it, and then you're going to go judge yourself and go, I should fix it, and then go, oh fuck, no, I'm just doing more of that. Because that's it. It's allowing yourself to process all of it. But to do that, you have to open your eyes, and at first that light's super blinding.
Yeah, very much so. And like initially it can be like very much about, oh, society, oh, the world's got to change. It's like, I got to change, you got to change. And again, it's like yes and no. You know, it's not you, but it's not someone else needing to change. It's almost like letting go of the need for anyone else to change, and then just being left with yourself and your own stuff. Because it's a lot more comfortable to think, well, the world's changing, we're changing the world. It's like a lot of a lot of irresponsibility goes with that as well. Like this I don't know if we wanted to comment on the comments at all, or we just want to leave those as they are. But yeah, like that last point, someone in the comments has been going back and forth just about creator and God, and I don't even know how to summarize exactly, but that last point about wanting to experience, well, I guess there needs to be context. Yeah, there does have to be context to even comment on this. But yeah, basically creator talk and back and forth. And now I'm like, fuck, I gotta summarize it before I comment on it. And I don't know even how, because I don't know if I've seen all the comments. But so maybe we'll just, now that little roundabout thought loop, maybe we will just leave those in the comments.
Yeah, not a bad idea, because otherwise we're going to get into a whole thing here. Yeah. How about we're going to wrap up this episode here, and we'll continue on after we record this very brief outro. Thanks so much for joining us for this commentary episode. We're going to be back to record our part 2 commentary episode of this episode 4. That'll be our 8th commentary episode in the very near future. But thank you for joining us. And then we're going to address this comment section as soon as Andrew says his goodbye.
Goodbye.
All right, perfect. All right. So that said, here we go. There is this, it's interesting to me, because outside of this ongoing attachment to the perspective of a creator, they're saying a lot of things that are really quite close to the point, right? Like, but there is always this ongoing, but it's not me, right? It can't be me. It's definitely not me. It's the creator. And then the reason for that is because, of course, this perspective allows you to experience what one wants without getting in the way. Maybe things are the way they are because we lost faith in each other or the creator, apparently. See, it's always about getting what you want, right? Like that's the whole thing. There's so many parts to this conversation. The creator already gave us this. Why the fuck would it care what we do? It already knows, so it's okay with everything. It doesn't let it bother it, you know. Who are we talking about? And I really want to know, like, you seem to be speaking on behalf of something that exists only in your imagination. And the only reason I think is just because you want there to be something other than just you. And I get that. I really do. You know, like believing makes people crazy. Once you know you don't need to believe in anything except apparently a creator.
Yeah, that one made me laugh right there. Like, not believing in anything includes that, but it is like that. It's like voice of your responsibility.
But
Because
it'd be kind of like, you know, your finger talking about your body. You know, like your finger, because it has this perspective of how much smaller it is than the rest of the body, is like, oh God, the creator. It's like, no, it didn't create you. You're part of it. Like you're it. In fact, you know, it's just that you have this perspective of yourself being very little. And so it seems very big by contrast. But the perspective of yourself is the addiction. All right. And you know how much of a perspective you're holding on to according to that contrast. You know, the more you're looking at yourself, the more there's a necessity for a God, right? Or something else to protect you or have false certainty in. So it's helpful to recognize that. It's just because, again, like the idea of a creator implies a creation, and none of this really exists. You know, not in the way that you'd like to think it does. It doesn't exist in time. It exists in potential, which means it was never created. It exists by virtue of the limitless nature of everything that could be. All of it exists and will forever now, but only in potential. We just experience it as reality. So the entire idea of a creator is really just looking for another father figure.
yeah, like something else, like something to pass responsibility to yeah, have that thought that you can do whatever you want without without there being any impact, as opposed to there always being impact to everything. Like everything that you do, like everything being a trade, every decision that you make, and it all has impact, as opposed to, oh no, God's got it figured out. Something else has it figured out. Something else. There's some, because again, it's like there's something else to tell me what to do. And as much as there's a comfort in that, there's very little freedom. It's like immediate comfort in prison, direction, right way. Certainly not freedom, but that comes with responsibility as well. But
Yeah. This has been fun. And I appreciate us taking the extra moments to address that, because it was ongoing through the episode, and I appreciate everybody else's patience, because I know it's a conversation that comes up from time to time. I will shut this thing down. Bam. There we are. We are back. I'm saying we have the power to change. But a moment ago, you were saying you were nothing. So who has the power to change? Your creator? Right? And that's what I mean by that disempowering loop. Right? It's all just cerebral nonsense at the end of the day. Right? Like you can go in so many directions just about, some fictitious divide between you and reality and some intelligence that's a higher order, and it's all going to give you some false sense of certainty. Or you could just be here. Right? And that's what takes the most faith at the end of the day, is just to not reach for that fictitious extra person, that fictitious voice that you can talk to that tells you it's going to be okay, because it's just you, whether you want to realize it or not. And it's not necessary, but as long as you reach for it, it's always going to tell you it's necessary, because that's really just you telling yourself. This is how we enable our own addiction to irresponsibility at the end of the day. So this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew.
Yeah, you had early on in the podcast mentioned that, like, there have been times more like over the last 20 years where you found yourself like praying to God in moments of, like, I don't know, just like desperation or uncertainty or discomfort, and like I found myself in that spot that I was like, oh, that would never happen, and it was like relatively recently, and as soon as I was doing it, as soon as I was like, because it was almost like a sort of knee jerk response, and I'm like, and immediately it was like, oh my god, I'm just talking to myself. I'm just talking to myself. Of course, and it just hit me, I don't know, a little bit differently because I did make that jump where I was like, something, something, tell me something. Like now, it's like such a, I don't know, a like disempowering, easy way out. Like, oh, I'm gonna pray for you. Like even that, it's like Jesus fucking Christ, going to church. Like, oh, I'm gonna do some good by sitting there saying prayers. It's like, yeah, it's gotten sillier and sillier seeming, but it all kind of plays into, yeah, that just, it makes sense in a certain mentality to look to something else, but it is, yeah, incredibly disempowering. So yeah, that's all I got. I don't think they're commenting anymore. So.
No, it seems to have died off, which is fine because it ended with the, yeah, I'm saying the same thing you guys, just using different words. And I always find how this happens. It happened to me the other day. You know, somebody was just straight up saying something. I'm like, but no. And then by the end of it, they're like, oh, obviously we agree. We're just using different words. And I wrote back, I'm like, no, I don't think we do. But have a great day anyway. Like that's just it. It's just like, that's okay. I'm okay with you not agreeing, and I'm okay with the fact that, you know, there are things that you don't want to let go of yet. I recognize it myself. I get it. I really do. Receive a good life. You already are. No, what you were saying isn't just that people think they need to be or do something in order to receive a good life. You were saying that you have to let the creator give you a good life, that you should have faith in a creator so you can have a good life. It's not just about you accepting you deserve it. There was a prerequisite belief in a creator that went with it. That is a very different thing. And you can backpedal as much as you want, but that's exactly what you were saying. And it's because, again, it's easy to lean on something. I know it. You know, I've, it's kind of like the expression, there's no atheists in foxholes. And for anybody who doesn't know what a foxhole is, it's an expression back to World War I. It was usually a hole that was dug out in the earth where a cannonball or a bomb had hit. And if you were a soldier and you were trying not to get shot, you'd end up at the bottom of this thing with bullets and shit flying overhead and bombs going off around you. And at that moment, when you feel like you have nothing left and everything's going to end, you're praying to anything at all, right? But ultimately, you're praying to yourself. Ultimately, you're just trying to give yourself some comfort while you are afraid. But what if you were to just recognize your fear and not need to be comforted from it? What if there is something other than the false certainty that keeps the fear at bay? What if you don't have to be so fragile? What if you can have faith? It's a very different option. That's all I got here. Not once did I say you need to do anything. No, you did, though. You said that it's faith in a creator that allows us to live a good life. You absolutely did.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to go back. We can just scroll up on those, but yeah, like not being afraid of being afraid either, and like not assuming that you got to get out of that fear. Admittedly, being in a foxhole, a little different than other certain things, but yeah, I've never been in that situation, but psychologically, not even gonna say I feel like I have psychologically, but yeah, so that's what the true creator does. It lets you be you without thinking about everything, but it's still like looking to something else to give you like permission to do it. The higher power sets us free from thinking we need to be a certain way. or receive a good life. Oh, so you have to maintain the perspective of a higher power in order to stay free? That doesn't sound very free. It erases. Oh, it does it for you. That doesn't sound free at all. It sounds disempowering and like you constantly have to, give thanks to something else or think that something else is doing something easy to maintain. Well, it's not easy, but if you do that, maintain your responsibility, keep being really, really irresponsible, like you can't avoid yourself either. Like you're still gonna feel all that stuff and experience that no matter what sort of cerebral ideas of a creator having your back you try and maintain. It's like self-honesty we're talking about in this episode, kind of goes hand in hand with that,
which is why it's fun to have documentation.
was that all
I never said that.
documentation?
Oh yeah, that was from way up in the conversation.
Oh,
that was from way earlier. The stuff he never said.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, this has been a blast. Thank you, everyone. We're going to be doing a marathon episode tomorrow. What time do you want to do that?
Good whenever. Yeah,
well, you're on Eastern time now.
Yeah, like I don't want it to be too early for you. Kind of whenever.
No, we don't.
During yeah, I don't even know. Like afternoon start. Are you thinking marathon in the sense of certain amount?
Shoot the shit, drum up some attention for the investor presentation.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Like
cool.
Yeah.
Noon, 1 o'clock Eastern.
Sure, 1 Eastern
works for me. It's like 10 a.m. here. Can sleep in a bit.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean we can do more in the afternoon too.
Well, we'll start there and see how long it goes.
Cool. Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well, everyone, we're going to fuck off here. Thank you so much for being here. Future me, who's editing this, I know you're watching this right now. Go back. We ended the episode like 10 minutes ago.